Inventory is more meta than it has ever been before from the release of Expert Mode. It allows us to farm with our favorite berry Pokemon to match Expert Mode's favorite berries more during the day. I'll cover the details of why that is when we look at the numbers towards the end of the video. This will be a long video because we're going to cover everything from start to finish about Expert Mode, everything I've learned in this past week about Expert Mode, but there are still things we don't know about it yet, so stay tuned for more updates. So don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video, it's Bro Vinny here. First, let's cover the basics of Expert Mode, and we've actually been through this already, but let's cover it real quick again. Expert Mode is currently only available for Greengrass Isle. It may be available in other islands at some point. To unlock Expert Mode, you do need to have reached Master 18 on Greengrass Isle, and you'll need an Expert ticket that you can get from the shops. When you enter Greengrass Expert Mode, 3 random berries will be rolled and a random dish type. One of the berries will be a main favorite berry and 2 of them will be sub favorite berries. The Pokemon who farm main favorite berry will be 10% faster. They get 1 free skill level up, and then there's 1 more side effect. 1 of 3 things may be chosen. Side effects can be any of these 3. You either get 20% more berry strength, which is 2.4 times as opposed to the regular 2 times power of a favorite berry. Or you can get more ingredients when you use a Pokemon that is favorite berry. It could be +1 extra ingredient, or 50% of the time, if it's an ingredient specialist, it could be +2 extra ingredients. Or you can have a side effect that gives you 25% more trigger rate for Pokemon that farm the favorite berry. The side effect bonus applies to all 3 favorite berries, not just the main type. All other Pokemon that don't match favorite berry get 15% slower. Now, the way that speed works in this game is a mistranslation. It actually shouldn't say 10% faster or 15% slower. In other languages besides English, they actually say 10% shortened time to farm the next ingredient or berry. So the helping time is shortened by 10% or increased by 15%. These numbers actually describe how helping time, which in the game is known as frequency, is lengthened or shortened. I didn't want to get into the maths this early in the video, but I do need to make it clear that when we talk about 10% faster, you don't actually get 10% more berries or ingredients. We are talking about a 1 divided by 0.9 because it's a 10% shortened frequency time. In other words, 11% more production, so 11% more berries, ingredients, and skill if you match the main favorite berry. Conversely, a 15% speed reduction, or rather a lengthened 15% production time, is 1 divided by 1.15, 14 to 13% loss of production, not 15%. So you could think of it as main favorite berry actually give you 11% more stuff, and non-favorite berry actually gives you 14% less stuff. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start combining it with other factors like sub-skill and nature, then it stacks up quite a bit. If you're confused by this, don't worry, you're probably just new to my channel because I covered this concept in a trilogy of videos. 1.5 to 2 years ago, I covered this confusing concept in the game and how it's been mistranslated from other languages. So if you're confused right now, don't worry, you're not alone. Thankfully, you don't need to know the exact numbers to know what's good or bad for your Pokemon and how to team build for an expert week, which is what the main point of this video is going to be. But if you need clarification, let us know in the comments section below, we'll try to help you out. However, for those of you who are curious how this 15% or the 10% interacts with other stats, like for example, how does it interact with helping speed M, helping speed S, and speed of help up nature? Well, previously we already know that everything within sub-skills are additive. So if you have helping speed S, helping speed M, it's 14% plus 7%, and if you have helping bonus on the team, it'll be plus 5% for every helping bonus team member, but capping out at 35% in total for sub-skill speed improvement. And then you would take that and multiply it by speed of help up or down. And according to Rain and X, the expert effect of 10% or 15% increase or decrease, respectively, are also multiplied rather than added like sub-skills do. So if we were to take my Raichu for example, it's got helping speed M and speed of help up if it's an electric favorite berry weak, and hypothetically there's one helping bonus team member on the team. Then how much production increase are we talking about? Well, the way it's calculated will be helping speed M plus helping bonus, which is 19% time reduction, times 0.9, which is equivalent to 10% time reduction, and then times another 0.9 because of the expert main favorite berry effect. If Raichu is not favorite berry at all, then it will be times 1.15 instead. The overall production rate is 1 divided by that because we're looking at the inverse. Time by itself isn't a production, it's the inverse of that. Which means my Raichu matching main favorite berry will get 52% more production than a neutral Raichu. Whereas if it doesn't match favorite berry, it gets 19% more production than a neutral Raichu. That's about a 33% difference between matching favorite and not matching favorite for my Raichu, which is more than what it sounds like when you say main favorite berry gets 10% speed increase and non-favorite berry gets 15% speed reduction. That sounds like a 25% difference to me, but actually it's more like a 33% difference. But this 30% is not consistent. It really depends on all the other stats put together, what that difference is between matching and not matching favorite berry. So every Pokemon actually needs to be evaluated individually about how it performs when it does or doesn't match favorite berry. That is what makes calculating for expert mode difficult. If you didn't understand that, don't worry too much. I just wanted to point out the difference between saying it's 10% better and 10% faster according to this game. To me, 10% faster should mean 10% better, but translation issues, it actually doesn't. And while we will reference these points later on, you don't need to know the exact numbers of whether you get 10% or 11% more production. You just need to know that it's better or worse to be fave and non-fave. Let's move away from the numbers for a bit. In doing expert mode, you are going to be met with more and better rewards. You have an increased chance of encountering shiny Pokemon, and also increased rate of encountering special Pokemon like Raikou. What I want to briefly focus on is the increase in research EXP, dream shards, and candies from doing expert mode, your resources. Now, the actual data mined info, so the drowsy power requirement, the candies, the dream shards, and the research EXP is actually exactly the same between Greengrass or Greengrass Expert or any other area. But something weird happens with expert mode that we have not yet figured out, which increases the amount of candies, dream shards, and research EXP you get for each sleep style. So while the information is on Raidenex's website, don't count on that as being your actual resources farmed. This might get updated in the future once we understand how the modifier works with expert mode. But I do want to give you an idea of what to expect. And the general consensus from most people I've talked to about expert mode, and granted I usually speak to veteran players, is that even though we start expert mode with 0% area bonus, also known as expert bonus, we seem to be getting a lot more resources than normal, so more dream shards than I would normally get at Greengrass. Just to give you an idea of what kind of numbers or improvements we're talking about, this is my Saturday night long sleep 100% sleep score. I obtained 305 million drowsy power. One of my spawns was a 2-star Minun, which got me 5800 research EXP and 8100 dream shards and 11 Minun candies. With 2-star sleep style, Minun usually gives only 2200 research EXP and 3100 dream shards, which means we had more than doubled the data mined amount that Minun would normally give for 2-star from a non-expert week. Now, if you take a look at all of the other spawns, you'll notice that the amount of increase varies a lot between different species and sleep styles, and this is something that RainNX is still working on to determine exactly what type and what amount of resources we get from expert mode. But while the exact formula of dream shards earned for the sleep style is still being worked on, let's take a look at the total dream shards that we can earn from some real examples. Now, if this were regular green grass, I would have expected 20,000 dream shards at about that 300 million drowsy power. This is what I got, but I do need to take away the incense spawn and also the good camp ticket spawn, which leaves me with about 28,000 dream shards from this 305 million session, which is about 40% more dream shards than regular green grass at the same drowsy power. Now, because we're comparing the same drowsy power, area bonus doesn't really matter, although this is just a simulation. Regardless, a 40% increase in dream shards is no joke. That's a lot of dream shards. Although I'm told that the rolling logic, in other words, the choice of spawns, is a bit different with expert mode. So again, we don't have a simulation for expert mode green grass. But what we do have is examples of people who have achieved extreme levels of drowsy power. I'm going to reference this video by a player called Magiari, who got Master 20 very early on. They had 1.1 billion drowsy power. These were the candies farmed for their 9 spawns, so one of them is the good camp ticket. And if we take away the luck incense, you're looking at about 75,000 dream shards being farmed minus the good camp ticket aggron, which was 26,000. A Giga Whale's dream shard level is about 75,000 minus the 26, so about 50,000 for their 8 spawns in a session. Now, what happens with extreme levels of drowsy power is that further increase doesn't actually improve your resources that much because you've kind of peaked on all the sleep styles that you can get anyway. So you can use this as a reference of what to expect in terms of extreme levels of drowsy power, tapering to about 50,000 dream shards that you can get in a session with 8 spawns and 100 sleep score, which if you compare to the average of green grass, once it tapers at very high drowsy power, it tapers to about 23,000. We're talking about double. Now, green grass is naturally an area that farms lower amount of resources. If we want to compare to another area, say Old Gold Power Plant, now just ignore the expert here because it's not accurate yet. The limit for Old Gold Power Plant is about 45,000. So expert mode is maybe marginally better than Old Gold Power Plant at maximum drowsy power for resource farming. But otherwise, it is better than all the other areas, Lakeside, Snowdrop, Cyan Beach, Taupe Hollow, etc. So if you optimize your gameplay for expert mode, you are expected to get more resources than normal. In fact, we could be looking at double if we only compare green grass to green grass expert. Okay, a tip for you guys. How do we use this to our advantage? Look at the massive dump of dream shards that we get from expert mode. Why don't we combine it with luck incense? So save your luck incenses, especially if you're free to play, until a week where you can do really well in expert mode, then use it. Even better, put it together with a good sleep day when your drowsy power can be multiplied by 2, 3, 4 times. And have this give you not 45,000 dream shards, but maybe nearly 200,000 dream shards and the research EXP dream shards as well. So you can also save your focus incense for this. Or what about an event which allow you to progress quicker during the week and stack it with an expert week so that you get more resources? and stack it with a good camp ticket. Why not? Your spawns are gonna get more dream shards and more research EXP. In fact, the mining that I showed you earlier is my Pokemon incense, so stack it with a Pokemon incense as well. Maximize the use of your expert ticket. But maybe not the first few times you do expert week, because you got to get your area bonus of your expert week up. You got to start from 0. It's called expert bonus, so that you would get even more dream shards to stack your good camp ticket, your luck incense, maybe a good sleep day and an event. Put it all together, maybe even more than 200,000 dream shards. The biggest problem with doing expert week remains to be team building to make sure you've got good berry specialists to cover the favorite berries. Unfortunately for candies, we don't seem to be getting as much of an increase for expert mode as for research EXP or dream shards, and maybe for good reason, because at high levels, so by the time you reach expert mode, when you invest Pokemon to high levels, the cost for dream shards increase more drastically than the costs for candies to raise your Pokemon. So as the level cap increases, the demand for dream shards go up. Relatively speaking, not as much candy requirements. So this might just reflect the dream shard needs are increasing more than candy needs. Next, let's take a look at spawn count. Why do we care about spawn count? Well, we want to have more spawns if possible early on in the week, because the more spawns mean the more choices you have on what to catch, and maybe even more chances to see a shiny Pokemon because there are simply more spawns. So what's the point of an increased shiny rate if you're not seeing the spawns anyway? Well, for normal green grass, to reach 8 spawns, you need about 20 million drowsy power. For reference, this is old gold power plant and 97 million to reach 8 spawns, which is equivalent to Ultra 5 Snorlax rank. In comparison, expert mode green grass only also needs 97 million, which is equivalent to about Grade 5 for expert mode Snorlax, to get 8 spawns. So about the same as old gold power plants, surprisingly. Not a lot harder to get 8 spawns. So if you had the same area bonus between expert mode green grass and old gold power plant, you should reach 8 spawns at about the same time, except it will depend on how good you are at building your team for this expert mode, because if all your Pokemon don't match favorite berry, they're all farming at 15% reduced speed, then you're not going to do as well as old gold power plant in terms of reaching the maximum number of spawns. So make sure you choose your berry specialists according to the favorite berries, especially the main favorite berry when doing expert week. The real question is, when we don't match favorite berry for whatever reason, because we need certain ingredients or skills, how are we going to team build according to that? Berry specialists are simple, just match the favorite, and if you don't want the ingredients, you can leave it to sneaky snack all week, as opposed to trying to collect its ingredients and its skill. But what about ingredient or skill specialists that don't match favorite berry? What do we do about those? Well, we'll come to that in a moment. Regardless, I think that's quite generous for a new area, essentially. I know it's the old area that's expert mode, but in a way, it's like a new area because there's different spawns, the mode is different, etc. And regarding missions of expert week, we do get different Pokemon incenses and also these additional missions, which basically require you to sleep with the 3 different favorite typing Pokemon for 20 hours. But one thing we tested is whether having multiple of the same typing will actually speed up completing these missions. And it turns out it doesn't. You can get a maximum of 13 hours per day if you actually sleep for 13 hours. So generally it'll take you 2 to 3 days to complete these missions. Okay, so those were the main concepts we needed for expert mode. Now I want to talk about inventory and why it is now more meta than before, and talk about one very specific team building aspect about ingredient specialists. Before we do that, we need to get back to the basics. We gotta talk about what inventory does. And if you already really understand inventory, I might just be explaining something you already understand. But this concept might help you decide which Pokemon to sleep with and which Pokemon to use during the day. If your Pokemon has low inventory, it's going to farm less ingredients over a long period where you don't collect, especially overnight, maybe during an 8.5 hour sleep. But it will farm more berries because of sneaky snacking. Of course, usually we prefer our ingredient specialists to farm ingredients. Rarely do we want them to do berries because there are berry specialist options to do that instead if you really just wanted berries. A standard Pokemon with no inventory sub-skills may reach sneaky snacking, in other words inventory limit, after about 3 to 4 hours of farming. Dependent on your speed stats, the higher your speed, the quicker it reaches that inventory limit. Here I've got a level 59 Venusaur, meaning the level 60 ingredient slot hasn't been unlocked. In a day, farms about 60-63 honey. I've set 8.5 hours of sleep, and we can see how much it farms during the day and during the night, relatively speaking. Let's have a look at the stats. So during the day, it farms 46 honey, and during the night, the 8.5 hour sleep, it farms 15 to 16 honey. The time it takes to reach the inventory, at which point it stops farming any more honey, it just farms berries when the pack is filled. The time to full pack is about 5 hours. Again, I don't have any stats on this Venusaur. It doesn't have speed, it doesn't have ingredient finding, so 5 hours to reach sneaky snacking. But notice this 15.8 honey. If I give Venusaur some speed stats, let's say helping bonus and helping speed, and have a look at its stats again, the amount of honey it farms does not increase nor decrease overnight. Of course, the amount farmed during the day goes up. The time it takes to reach the inventory limit now reduces to 3.5 hours. I think you might see where I'm going with this, because now if I give it inventory up, let's say inventory L, and have a look at it overnight, it now farms 26 honey. So a fair bit more than before. During the 8.5 hours, the time to full pack is now nearly 6 hours. So it's still farming ingredients for 5 to 6 hours, after which it doesn't anymore. So right now it's on 26 honey with all of those stats. Let's clean up all the stats again and have a look at what happens if I give it ingredient finding M, a good skill for an ingredient specialist. It does farm a little bit more honey, but not a lot, because the inventory is still limiting it from farming any more. So with ingredient finding M, it's getting 19 honey. Let's also give it another ingredient finding nature. So let's say quiet nature, and take a look at its overnight farming. Not a lot more. So overnight, speed doesn't change how much ingredient is farmed. Ingredient finding very minimally affects how much ingredient is farmed, but inventory significantly impacts on how much ingredient an ingredient specialist would bring home. What I really wanted to show you guys is if we compare level 59 and level 60, in other words, unlocking that third ingredient, yes, generally speaking, you'll see an improvement in the honey farmed, but not really because of nighttime. So again, let's take a look at the level 59, 15.8 honey, whereas the level 60, yeah, a little bit more, 17.4 honey. The main difference actually comes from daytime farming, because nighttime, again, we're limited by inventory. Both of them have 27 inventory. Once 27 berries or ingredients are packed into this inventory, it stops farming ingredients. The time it takes to get to full pack originally is 5 hours 15 minutes, but with level 60, it becomes 4 hours and 19 minutes, so it gets to that inventory limit a little bit quicker. Regardless, you don't get a lot more ingredient by the time you wake up in the morning. But you will see more sneaky snacking because it does reach that inventory limit quicker, kind of like speed. Long story short, unlocking that level 60 ingredient more affects daytime farming than nighttime farming. Unless of course you got a huge inventory, because you're kind of making it like daytime farming anyway when inventory limit is not as reached. So when I say overnight sleep, I usually assume we will hit the inventory limit. Otherwise, it's actually like daytime farming. So now I have a question for you guys. If I have a level 60 mono honey Venusaur and say I'm very poor, I can't reach level 60 on another Mono Honey Venusaur, and I have to choose one to go to sleep with and one to farm during daytime, and it can't be the same one, which option is better? Should I sleep with Venusaur level 60 and then farm daytime with Venusaur level 50? Or should I sleep with level 50 Venusaur and then daytime farm with level 60 Venusaur? Well, if you remember everything I just said, it's obvious that because of the level 60 unlock, it's going to be better to run this, the level 60, during daytime because it's going to farm you a lot more honey and go to sleep with the level 50 Venusaur. If you did it the other way around, you're limiting this level 60's potential to do a lot more farming during daytime. And you're limiting it because of its inventory limits. The level 50 would have done about the same honey overnight as the level 60 because they have the same inventory. Now, of course, you're not really going to have a situation where you got two of the exact same Pokemon. One at level 50, one at level 60. But what you could have is maybe this situation. Maybe you're on a dessert week and you've got a level 50 Milk Blastoise, a level 60 Venusaur, and you kind of need both ingredients, and it's nighttime, you just finished the dinner, but you need both of these ingredients for breakfast the next day. Now you got to decide which of these to sleep with and then which one to swap in the morning to farm. And if you were paying attention, the level 50 Blastoise is the preferred one to go to sleep because inventory is what limits its production anyway. Allow the Venusaur with level 60 unlocked to do the daytime farming. Of course, the situation isn't ever going to be as clear cut as this because you got to look at the natures and sub skills, whether they have inventory up, but the concept is there. If you have a Pokemon that has inventory up L, they are better to sleep overnight. And while we often look at inventory like it's a pretty average skill, that was never my intention. I have since 2024, in December 2024, I made this chart. I've always put inventory at the top of the list for ingredient specialists. It just depends on how you use it. If you don't log into the game often, inventory is very important because it's like having multiple long sleeps throughout the day. It's more important if you have berry finding because that clogs up your inventory more for an ingredient specialist. It's also important if you have a high speed because again, you're going to fill that inventory quicker. So inventory has always been an amazing sub skill for an ingredient specialist. The only time it's useless is if you log into the game a lot to clear the productions from your ingredient specialist and you're very active with the game, but at some point you still need to go to sleep. So inventory is quite important. But this is all just the core mechanic of the game. That hasn't changed since the start. Why does this matter now that expert mode is here? Well, because we just said expert mode increases speed of your main favorite Pokemon and decreases the speed of your non-favorite Pokemon. But speed doesn't matter overnight for ingredient specialists. Yes, it does affect the berry production a bit, but it has zero effect on ingredients farmed once inventory limit is reached. Remember earlier when I showed you the level 59 Venusaur farming 15.8 honey, but no matter how much speed I give it or take away, by the same token, the amount of honey it farms overnight is exactly the same. So that means ingredient specialists during an expert mode week who don't match favorite berry, so let's say you don't have grass as a favorite berry, well, they're not harmed overnight compared to a normal week. Yes, again, you have a little bit less of the berry production, but again, it's not the main focus anyway. You should be running as many favorite match berry specialists as you can anyway. And by the same token, you're not actually improving your team building that much. Even if grass is your main favorite berry, you get, yes, 10% more speed, but you're not farming anymore by running Venusaur overnight, even if it's match favorite berry, because again, this is the main limiting factor. You may get about 11% more grass berries, but not more honey. So the idea of team building a berry matched ingredient specialist that works for daytime, it doesn't work for nighttime. You don't need it to be berry matched. Unless, of course, you've got huge inventory that actually when you do wake up, your Pokemon like never reach sneaky snacking, Or maybe you do collect your stuff overnight. Maybe you run the Pokemon Go Plus so you can actually open your game in the middle of the night. Then yes, it's basically like daytime farming anyway. In which case, speed does matter. So if every one of your ingredient specialists have inventory up L, they are relatively stronger for expert week, because you can farm a lot of ingredients overnight, and then when morning comes, you can go back to just matching favorite berries on your berry specialists. Or do other stuff like skill specialties, or tasty chance, or expand pot, or whatever else you need. Do be careful that I'm not recommending you sleep with ingredient specialists. That is not the point. Berry specialists remain to be top tier for sleeping overnight, because when sneaky snacking is reached, they actually become relatively even more powerful because they don't drop any ingredients. The approximately 10 to 20% chance of landing an ingredient doesn't exist when sneaky snacking happens. So 100% of all productions become berries, and berry specialists become relatively stronger still. And that's on top of the fact that you might have the 10% speed boost if you're main fave, or the 20% more berry power because of the 1 in 3 sight effects that you have. So where possible, you would still prefer to run berry specialists both day and night. It's just that you still need ingredients for dishes, so we have to find a time to use them. Ideally, they are used during daytime, so that inventory limit is not reached. You get the most ingredients you can in the least amount of time. But team building is like this, you know, you might not have 5 favorite match berry specialists anyway. You might have 3. So then you have 2 slots for something else, and maybe you'll put 1 for healer, then you got 1 slot for ingredient specialist. Then who would you choose? Would it be the level 59 Venusaur, or would it be the level 60 Blastoise? That is the point of this video. Then maybe morning comes and you rotate out the Venusaur, swap in the Blastoise. Yes, you probably need coffee as well and other stuff. Then maybe swap out one of your sub favorite berry specialist for another ingredient specialist, so that you spend less time farming ingredients, and then everything else just normal gameplay. Basically, having inventory allows you to farm with your favorite berry Pokemon more often. If one of your ingredient specialists is main favorite berry, then that's even better during the day, not much use for night. So if I give this Venusaur inventory up L, it is level 59, it hasn't made level 60, and it's a week where water is the main favorite berry, so that's Blastoise. Then there are 3 reasons to sleep with Venusaur instead of Blastoise. One is that it has inventory up, so it does more ingredients overnight, and it's going to get capped anyway by the inventory limit after 8 hours 40 minutes to sleep. It hasn't unlocked level 60, but it doesn't really matter because, well, it's going to hit inventory limit at about 8.5 hours. It allows Blastoise to farm at level 60 in the daytime, and Blastoise gets main favorite berry speed up, which does improve daytime farming. Now, all of this assumes that you are trying to cook the strongest dish. What I didn't try to answer in this video is if you could farm favorite berry on ingredients that supply a weaker dish, would it be worth doing that over a non-favorite berry ingredient specialist, but that focuses on a stronger dish? Now, I haven't done the numbers, but my gut feeling says it's probably still better to focus on the stronger dishes. One last thing about this inventory. We can extend it to skill Pokemon as well, like say a healer. The greater the inventory, the more chances you get 1 or 2 triggers in the morning. Because when an inventory limit is reached, skill specialists can no longer trigger any additional skill triggers. So if it's banked 1 skill trigger, that's all you're going to get no matter how much longer you sleep. If you're unlucky enough and you didn't bank any skill trigger when inventory limit is reached, then you won't get any triggers at all in the morning. But it's the same as ingredient specialists, it's not affected by its speed or expert mode's effect of speed. It is largely dependent on inventory and the skill trigger rate. So let's take Gardevoir with absolutely neutral stats. If you sleep about 8.5 hours with it, then by the time it reaches 6 hours 20 minutes, it's reached its inventory limit. Now, what happens if we have neutral stats is that it has a 37% chance of one trigger, 29.7% chance of double trigger. Give it skill trigger M, the chance of triggering goes up to 35% for one trigger, which is less than a neutral, but that's because some of it got shifted to the double trigger, so 42% chance of double trigger. But if we give it inventory instead of skill trigger, look at this. Yes, it also goes down for one trigger to about the same as skill trigger M, but the chance of double trigger goes higher than skill trigger M. So inventory can be good even for skill specialists for overnight. But if we gave it helping speed, take a look at this. Compare this 37 and 29, nothing has changed compared to the neutral Gardevoir. Yes, we get a bit more berry production and ingredient production, therefore a higher total strength than all the others. But if you're just talking about sleeping with a Pokemon, Gardevoir isn't better when it has helping speed. This is something that affects daytime farming. It does improve the skill trigger amount for daytime. So once again, even skill specialists, if they're non-fave, aren't actually affected that much overnight, even during an expert week, especially so if they have large inventory. But what about if we compare two different types of healing? So we've got energy for everyone from Gardevoir and Slowking, who does energizing cheer. Generally speaking, we prefer energy for everyone because it heals more and more consistently, more leveled amount of healing. Unless you've got team members who do self-healing, then maybe energizing cheer could be better because it would try not to hit those Pokemon that are self-healing, but it's just hard to beat these numbers. Energy for everyone is 18 heals per Pokemon, 5 Pokemon on the team is 90 heals per trigger. Energizing cheer is about 51 heals in a trigger. And yes, generally speaking, energizing cheer do trigger more often, but despite that, the total amount of heals, so the number of triggers times the actual trigger at max level, gives you about 222 heals in a day versus the 65.6 times 5, which is a lot more than 222. So generally speaking, Gardevoir or energy for everyone is just going to heal a lot more. But let's give it some speed. Let's pretend it is EX mode at Greengrass Isle and its main water type favorite berry right now. So right now Gardevoir is suffering the 15% speed reduction and Slowking is getting the 10% speed boost. I'm leaving it as 8.5 hours sleep, so we are doing overnight as well. In terms of total triggers in a day, we're looking at 60 heals from Gardevoir per team member. So that's 300 heals, which is still more than Slowking. So comparing these numbers, it still makes sense to run energy for everyone. There is an advantage of Slowking being favorite berry farming double the total strength compared to Gardevoir. So if you've got a good energy for everyone healer, don't be afraid to use it just because it's not favorite berry. I haven't done every single situation because we can also look at other Pokemon that are self-healing to see if we can avoid using energy for everyone altogether, but that's not the point of this video. The point is to explain that inventory is relatively stronger because of expert mode. Not that it was bad before, it just depends on how you were using it. The only time I've found that kind of energizing cheer improvement over energy for everyone, if they are main favorite, is with Toxtricity's or Minun's minus ability. Again, what I've done is I've set Poison as the main favorite type here, and as you can see, 2 Toxtricity farms 310 heals, and it would be more evenly spread than Slowking because you get twice as many triggers but less each time. It does beat Gardevoir when it's not favorite berry, suffering the 15% speed reduction, but plus and minus is just very expensive to invest, and you have to consider a lot of other factors like whether you actually need 200 expand pot in a day, If you're running Good Camp Ticket, you probably don't need any of this expand pot. If you aren't, maybe you do need the expand pot and you can run Toxtricity and Minun for the healing instead of running Energy for Everyone. But if you're running Toxtricity and Minun, then you better have Electric as a sub or vice versa between Poison and Electric. A lot of this doesn't make sense from an investment perspective because you're just looking at a lot of main seeds to be prepared for any situation. So that's it about inventory. Last thing I want to cover is preparation for an expert week. As I've said in an expert mode video much earlier on, try to capture one of every berry typing berry specialist, so that you can almost always cover the main favorite berry if you roll that main favorite berry typing, just to maximize your benefits, get that 10% speed boost, etc. There are of course some exceptions, as you might have come to know by now. Something like Slarking doesn't really count as a berry specialist, even though it is by name. Sceptile is a skill specialist, but it does work better as a berry specialist, so count that as your grass berry specialist if you got a good one. Dragonite and Gengar come very close to being berry specialists if they have berry finding. So there are several exceptions to this rule, but try to get one of every typing. Secondly, ingredient prep the week before so that you don't even need to worry about which ingredient specialist to sleep with on the first or second night. Try and get your drowsy power up as much as possible in that first or second day. So the less you have to fiddle around with ingredient specialists on the first few days, the stronger the rest of your week. Thirdly, as usual, prep from Sunday into Monday. Maybe start expanding your pot from Sunday night because that carries over to the next week. Tasty Chance doesn't carry over to the next week, but some people time travel so that they can get to the next week a bit earlier. You can still do that and then have your Tasty Chance trigger earlier as well. Number 4, resource management. Hold on to your main seeds and your dream shards so you can dump them on the Pokemon that you need for an expert week, but don't be too wasteful because you might want to consider long term as well. What I've done is I've raised about 3 to 4 ingredient specialists to level 60 of my first expert week to help me offset that 15% speed loss by being non-favorite. But I had to have saved a lot of candies and dream shards to be able to do that. Main seeds, if you held on to some main seeds, then maybe you can dump them into an Energy for Everyone healer that matches the favorite berry type. But as I said, if you have a good Energy for Everyone healer to begin with that's already invested, well, that can work even if it isn't matching favorite berry. So don't be wasteful about your main seeds. And number 5, consider re-rolling, but it will be expensive. It will cost you 1 expert ticket and 1 easy travel ticket in order to re-roll the berries if you don't happen to get a good one. If you can't match any of the 3 favorite berries, then you could be in trouble for the expert week. Then re-roll with your easy travel ticket and your expert ticket. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Thank you for watching, guys. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe.